rule one is stand up straight with your shoulders back, and it's about a general attitude towards life. So hierarchies are very stable features of life in general, and certainly of human life. And wherever you have any system of values, you have a hierarchy, because a system of values implies that one thing is better than another. If you have a situation where one thing is better than another, then some people are better at doing it than others, and you get a hierarchy. To stand up straight with your shoulders back is a literal injunction, but also a metaphorical injunction, because what you do when you stand up like that is you kind of expose the vulnerable surfaces of your body. It's an act of courage. It's an act of taking on the voluntary responsibility of contending with hierarchical organization and uncertainty. And it's a good physical manifestation of the moral courage that's necessary to live life properly. And it's something that leaders naturally embody. And that's true not only of human beings, by the way, it's also true of animals all the way down the biological chain. So the more successful creatures, let's say, are also those who comport themselves in an upright manner. And, even in our common language, to be upright is not only something that we think about physically, but also morally, right? To be an upright person is to tell the truth and to act forthrightly and to do what you say you're going to do, and all of those things. So that's all of a piece. And so that's rule one. Rule two, which is treat yourself like you're someone responsible for helping. That's an extension of rule one in some sense. The idea would be that, people are often ashamed and embarrassed and anxious because of their insufficiencies and failures and the incomplete nature of their characters and all the things they don't know and all of that. And so it's useful to develop and practice an ethic of detached self-regard. Like, it's not narcissism, it's not self-esteem, it's not grandiosity, it's none of that. It's just the clear realization that as other people have value and as it's necessary to treat them that way if you want anything in your relationships whatsoever to go right, so it's also necessary to develop that attitude towards yourself, despite the knowledge you have of all your inadequacies. And that's a really good thing to practice, because it requires practice, both the detachment and then that ethic of care. So, and then you want to act in accordance with your highest values. Now that means you have to figure out what those values are. If you act in accordance with your highest values, sometimes that makes your day-to-day operations difficult, because you have to confront unpleasant truths. You have to discuss things that you'd rather avoid. It would be easier to act to decrease conflict in the moment. But it's a very bad medium to long-term strategy. You have to engage in a certain amount of conflict, moment to moment, if you're going to say and do the things that are necessary in order to set things right in the medium to long term and for an increasingly large number of people. And that's also another guide to leadership, I would say. You need a broad-scale vision. You have to know what it is that you're doing with your life, let's say generally speaking, but more particularly in the next 3 to 5 years. What do you want? What do you want from your friends, your family, your intimate relationships, your employment, your education, your care of your mental and physical health, your response to temptations like drug and alcohol use? If you could have what you wanted, if you could lay your life out properly, how would you be functioning across those 7 dimensions? Why would that work for you? Why would it work for your family? And why would it work for the broader community? Then that gives you a reason. And if you have a reason that's well thought through, that you find compelling, so that's a compelling story, let's say, the kind of compelling story a leader might tell, then that will provide you with motivation to do the things that are difficult that you need to do. So that's positive emotion, that motivation. It's a neurochemical system that runs on the chemical dopamine. It's the neurochemical system that underlies people's willingness to undertake something voluntarily. So we experience most positive emotion in relationship to a goal. And what that means is if you don't have a goal, then you don't have any motivation. And so what that means is you better have your goals well delineated, because that way you'll be maximally motivated. Now the additional advantage to that is that if you have your goals delineated and they're compelling goals for you, it also makes you less anxious and uncertain and stressed, because your pathway forward into the future is mapped, and that makes it more certain, and uncertainty causes stress and physiological load. Okay, so you want to have your large-scale vision, you want to have it thought out on a 3 to 5 year basis, you want to have it cover those 7 or so dimensions that we already described. You want to see why it's relevant to you and your family and the broader community. You want to break that down into your monthly, weekly, and daily practices, and if they can be routinized, then so much the better. And then that becomes built into you. So what happens neurologically is that when you do something new, you use almost your whole brain. That's a good way of thinking about it, particularly the right side of it, the right hemisphere. And as you practice something, the amount of your brain you use gets smaller and smaller and moves leftward until you basically build a effective little machine at the back that takes care of it automatically. Routinizing things decreases the cognitive and physiological load. It's a big deal. And if you routinize good habits, then they become part of your character and part of what people come to expect of you. To be precise in your speech does 2 things. It specifies your goal, and it reduces uncertainty. You see what you aim at. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I really don't, because you're a lot more blind than you think. There's a lot of the world that you don't see. You see most of what's in front of you in a very blurry way, like your peripheral vision is extremely low resolution. You see clearly a tiny focal area that's where you're pointing your eyes. And you point your eyes at what you want to pay attention to. And what you want to pay attention to is generally associated with what you want. So what that means is that the world reveals itself to you in relationship to what you want. And so that's really helpful, because you want to see the world so you don't stumble blindly through it and fall into a pit. You want to get to where you're going. And so if you specify where you're going very clearly, then that enables you to see the pathway forward. Now, the upside to that is that you can probably get to where you want to go. The downside is you also make your conditions of failure very explicit. And that's hard on people in the short term. You know, it's easy to delude yourself and to leave everything vague, because then you can't tell when you're failing. But that doesn't stop you from failing, it just stops you from seeing it while it's happening. Then the other advantage to being precise in your speech and your aims is that helps you tell the difference between what's important and what isn't important. And you want almost everything to be not important. You know, in times of crisis in your life, everything becomes important. So imagine that you have a new physical symptom that's distressing and you don't understand it. So then you're thinking, oh my God, what's happening? Am I collapsing physically? Have I got a serious illness? Is it a fatal illness? What's going to happen to my family? Is my whole life going to fall apart? Like, what happens when something that you can't specify occurs is that everything becomes relevant. And that's terrible. No one ever wants that. You want hardly anything to be relevant. And so if you specify your goal, then almost everything becomes irrelevant, and only those things that are important stand up in sharp relief. That's also a real boon to the people that you're communicating with, because they know what you want then. And so even if you're a harsh person, let's say that you're pretty punitive, and if people don't do a good job, you let them know. If you specify what you want, then they know how to avoid your harshness. And the more precise you are in your formulation of the problem and in your presentation of a solution and the role you might play in that solution, the more likely you are to advance on all fronts. As far as I can tell, there's nothing you can do that moves you and your agenda, your vision, let's say, forward faster than precision in speech.